Vet collapses after examining this horse's unusual condition. What did he see? It was a quiet evening at the Pine Hollow Animal Clinic nestled in the heart of the Appalachian foothills. Dr. Marcus Hayes, a seasoned veterinarian with over 2 decades of experience, was finishing up his paperwork when the phone rang. The clinic was supposed to close in 10 minutes, but something about the urgency in the caller's voice made him pick up. Before we continue with the video and dive deeper into the incredible story, I want to ask for your help. I'm aiming to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and your support would mean the world to me. If you've been enjoying this content, please hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. And let me know where you're watching from in the comments down below. "This is Dr. Hayes," he said, his tone brisk yet polite. "Doctor, you have to come now," the voice on the other end pleaded. It was a woman, her voice shaky and edged with panic. "It's my horse. He's acting strange. I've never seen anything like it." "Calm down," Dr. Hayes replied, slipping into his reassuring professional tone. "What's your horse's name, and what seems to be the issue?" "His name is Apollo," the woman said, barely able to keep her voice steady. "He's been lethargic for days, and now he won't eat or drink. But there's something else, something wrong with his skin. I don't know how to describe it. You just have to see for yourself." Dr. Hayes scribbled down the address she provided. He'd handled countless emergencies over the years, from colic to lacerations, but something about her description unsettled him. He grabbed his medical bag and hurried to his truck, his instincts telling him this would be no ordinary case. The drive to the woman's farm was uneventful, but tense. The sun had set, and a sliver of moonlight bathed the countryside in a ghostly glow. When Dr. Hayes pulled into the driveway, the headlights illuminated a figure standing by the barn. A young woman in her late 20s, her face pale with worry. "I'm Kate," she said, rushing to meet him as he stepped out of the truck. "Please, he's in the barn. I don't know what's happening to him." Dr. Hayes followed her inside, his boots echoing against the wooden floor. The barn was dimly lit, the air heavy with the earthy scent of hay and animals. In the last stall stood Apollo, a towering chestnut stallion with a white blaze running down his face. But something was undeniably wrong. The horse's head drooped low, his usually glossy coat dull and patchy. But it was his skin that caught Dr. Hayes's attention. Irregular patches glowed faintly, as though a soft light emanated from beneath his fur. The glow pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. "What on earth?" Dr. Hayes muttered, stepping closer. Apollo's ears flicked slightly at his approach, but the horse didn't react otherwise. Dr. Hayes ran his hands over Apollo's neck and back, his practiced fingers searching for signs of injury or infection. The glowing patches were warm to the touch, but there was no swelling or open wounds. "Has he been near anything unusual? A new feed, plants, chemicals?" Dr. Hayes asked, his mind racing for logical explanations. "No," Kate said, wringing her hands. "He's been on the same diet for years, and he hasn't left the property." Dr. Hayes opened his medical bag and prepared to draw blood for testing. As he inserted the needle, Apollo flinched slightly, but remained still. The blood he collected was dark and thick, almost syrupy, an anomaly he'd never seen before. "This doesn't make any sense," he said, shaking his head. "I've never encountered anything like this." Before he could say more, a low, guttural sound echoed through the barn. It wasn't a sound Apollo made. It seemed to come from deep within the horse's chest, like a growl mixed with a groan. Kate stepped back, her face pale. "What was that?" she whispered. Dr. Hayes didn't answer. His hands trembled slightly as he checked Apollo's vitals. The horse's heartbeat was irregular and his breathing was shallow. Yet his eyes, bright and intelligent, remained fixed on Dr. Hayes, as though pleading for help. "I need to get these samples to the lab," Dr. Hayes said, his voice tight. "Keep him calm and call me if anything changes. I'll be back as soon as I can." Kate nodded, though fear lingered in her eyes. As Dr. Hayes drove away, the glowing patches on Apollo's skin flashed brighter for a moment, casting eerie shadows across the barn walls. Dr. Hayes didn't notice, but Kate did. Her stomach churned as she watched the strange phenomenon. She couldn't shake the feeling that Apollo's condition was more than a medical mystery. It was something far more extraordinary. Little did they know the answers they sought would be stranger than anything they could have imagined. Dr. Marcus Hayes barely slept that night. The moment he returned to the clinic, he began analyzing the blood samples he had taken from Apollo. The dark, viscous texture of the horse's blood wasn't just abnormal. It was unsettling. Under the microscope, the cells seemed distorted, some larger than normal, while others appeared almost fragmented. Most disturbingly, faint luminescent specks floated within the plasma, reminiscent of the glowing patches on Apollo's coat. "What is this?" Dr. Hayes muttered to himself, his brow furrowed. As the centrifuge spun, he searched veterinary databases for any condition that might explain what he was seeing. But nothing matched Apollo's symptoms. No infection, toxin, or genetic condition explained the glowing patches or the unusual composition of his blood. The centrifuge beeped, signaling the end of the spin cycle. Dr. Hayes retrieved the separated plasma, noting its odd silvery sheen. He decided to send a sample to a specialist lab in the city, hoping their advanced equipment might provide answers. While waiting for the courier, Dr. Hayes's phone buzzed. It was Kate. "Dr. Hayes," she said, her voice shaking, "you need to come back. Something's happening to Apollo." "What do you mean?" he asked, already grabbing his bag and heading for the door. "His glowing patches, they're spreading, and now there's something on the barn walls. You just need to see it." Dr. Hayes's heart raced as he drove back to Kate's farm. The rural roads were eerily quiet, the pre-dawn sky painted in deep shades of purple and blue. When he arrived, Kate was waiting for him outside the barn, holding a flashlight. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "He's in there," she said, pointing toward the barn. Dr. Hayes entered cautiously, the beam of his flashlight sweeping across the stalls. Apollo stood where they had left him, but his condition had visibly worsened. The glowing patches on his coat were now larger, covering his neck, shoulders, and sides. The light from them was brighter, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. But it wasn't just Apollo. Strange, faintly glowing markings now adorned the wooden walls of the barn. They looked like swirling patterns, lines and curves that almost resembled writing or symbols. "What in the world?" Dr. Hayes whispered, his voice trailing off. "I swear those weren't there before." Kate said, stepping closer. They appeared overnight. And look, Apollo keeps staring at them. Indeed, the horse's gaze was fixed on one of the glowing patterns, his ears flicking back and forth. His body trembled slightly, but his eyes were alert and intense, as if he understood something they couldn't. Dr. Hayes approached cautiously, studying the markings. He reached out to touch one, but Kate grabbed his arm. "Don't," she said, her voice trembling. "What if it's dangerous?" Dr. Hayes hesitated but lowered his hand. "I don't think it's harmful, but I'll take a sample just to be sure." Using a sterile swab, he collected some of the glowing substance from the wall. It was slightly viscous, like a mix between sap and paint, and it emitted a faint warmth. "What could this be?" Kate asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Dr. Hayes admitted. "It's not paint or anything I've seen before. I'll analyze it at the clinic, but I think we're dealing with something unusual." Apollo let out a soft whinny, drawing their attention back to him. He stomped his hoof, his glowing patches flickering in sync with his movements. Dr. Hayes placed a calming hand on the horse's neck, feeling the warmth radiating from his coat. "It's like he's trying to tell us something," Kate said. Dr. Hayes nodded. "It does seem that way, but what?" As they stood there, another sound broke the silence, a low, humming vibration that seemed to emanate from the barn itself. Kate and Dr. Hayes exchanged a startled glance before the sound grew louder, resonating in their chests. "What is that?" Kate asked, her voice tinged with panic. "I don't know," Dr. Hayes said, stepping back. The glowing markings on the walls pulsed in time with the sound, their light growing brighter with each pulse. Apollo remained calm, his gaze unwavering. Then, without warning, the humming stopped, and the barn plunged into silence. Kate clutched Dr. Hayes's arm. "What just happened?" "I don't know," he said again, his voice shaking. "But I think we're dealing with something far beyond a medical condition." Before they could say more, Apollo let out a loud, piercing whinny and stomped his hoof again. The vibrations from his stomp rippled through the barn floor, and a section of the wooden boards cracked slightly, revealing a narrow gap. Dr. Hayes crouched down, shining his flashlight into the gap. Beneath the barn floor was a small, hollowed-out space filled with what appeared to be shards of glowing crystals. "What on earth is this?" he muttered, carefully lifting one of the shards. The crystal was cool to the touch despite its glow, and it emitted a faint hum, much like the sound they had heard earlier. Kate crouched beside him, her eyes wide with awe and confusion. "Do you think this has something to do with Apollo's condition?" she asked. "It has to," Dr. Hayes said, his mind racing. "Whatever these crystals are, they're affecting him and possibly this entire area." As they examined the crystals, Apollo stepped closer, lowering his head to nuzzle one of the larger shards. The glowing patches on his coat brightened momentarily, as if reacting to the proximity of the crystal. Dr. Hayes stood, his heart pounding. "We need to get these analyzed, and we need to figure out if they're dangerous for Apollo or anyone else." Kate nodded. "Do you think this could spread?" Dr. Hayes glanced at Apollo, who seemed calm despite the strange phenomena. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we need answers, and fast." What neither of them realized was that the crystals, and Apollo's connection to them were part of something far more profound than they could have imagined, something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the natural world. The day after their discovery of the glowing crystals, Dr. Marcus Hayes wasted no time sending samples to a specialized lab in the city. He and Kate spent hours theorizing about the connection between the crystals and Apollo's mysterious condition, but no answer seemed sufficient. Apollo, meanwhile, seemed to grow more attuned to the barn's peculiar hum and the markings on the walls. By mid-afternoon, Dr. Hayes received a call from Dr. Sylvia Carter, a geochemist at the lab he had contacted. Her voice carried a mix of urgency and disbelief. "Dr. Hayes, I've analyzed the sample you sent," she began, "and I have to admit I've never encountered anything like it. The composition of the crystal is abnormal." "In what way?" Hayes asked, gripping his phone tightly. "These crystals contain a unique blend of minerals and trace elements that aren't found together naturally, not on Earth at least," Dr. Carter explained. "What's more, they emit a low-frequency electromagnetic pulse. If you're saying this material was found beneath your barn, I'd strongly advise extreme caution. There's a chance it could affect biological systems." Dr. Hayes's heart sank. "It already has," he admitted. "The horse I told you about, Apollo, his blood and skin have changed. Do you think this, whatever it is causing it?" "It's highly probable," Dr. Carter replied. "I'll need more samples to understand the scope of its effects. But this isn't just a geological anomaly. It could have far-reaching implications." Dr. Hayes hung up and immediately relayed the findings to Kate. The two stood outside the barn, staring at Apollo, who grazed calmly nearby. Despite the alarming information, he seemed healthier than ever. His glowing patches had stabilized, and he exuded a serene confidence, as though aware of his unique role in the unfolding mystery. "What do we do?" Kate asked, her voice trembling. "We need to figure out if these crystals have spread beyond this property," Dr. Hayes said. "If they're as unusual as Dr. Carter says, the implications could be massive." Just as they were discussing their next steps, Apollo raised his head, his ears twitching. He let out a low whinny and began walking toward the barn. Kate and Hayes followed, exchanging uneasy glances. Once inside, Apollo approached the area where the crystals had been found. He stomped his hoof twice, and the hum from the barn walls returned, louder this time. The glowing symbols on the walls brightened, their patterns shifting slightly. "It's like he's activating something," Kate whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum. Dr. Hayes nodded, his breath shallow. "He knows what he's doing." Suddenly, a section of the barn floor gave way, revealing a larger cavity beneath. The hum grew into a resonating vibration, and the symbols on the walls pulsed in unison. Kate gasped as Apollo stepped closer to the edge of the opening, peering down with a calm intensity. Dr. Hayes crouched near the hole, his flashlight illuminating what appeared to be a vast network of glowing crystal formations, spreading like roots deep into the earth. The sight was both breathtaking and eerie. "This isn't just a deposit," he said. "It's a system." "What do you mean?" Kate asked. "These crystals are interconnected," Hayes explained. "They're communicating with each other and with Apollo somehow. This isn't just a geological phenomenon, it's alive." Kate shuddered, but Apollo showed no fear. He stomped his hoof again, and the pulsing light intensified. Then, as if on cue, the hum stopped abruptly, plunging the barn into silence. The glowing symbols faded, leaving behind faint outlines. "What just happened?" Kate asked. "I think he's finished whatever he started," Dr. Hayes said, glancing at Apollo. "But I have no idea what it means." Over the next week, the crystal's presence drew the attention of experts, scientists, and media outlets. The property became a hub of activity as researchers arrived to study the phenomenon. Dr. Carter herself visited, marveling at the unique formation beneath the barn. "This isn't just an anomaly," she said during one meeting. "It's a breakthrough. If these crystals truly interact with living organisms, they could revolutionize our understanding of energy, biology, and the natural world." But amidst the scientific frenzy, Apollo remained the center of attention. Researchers were baffled by his connection to the crystals, and tests revealed that his physiology had changed in remarkable ways. His blood now contained trace elements of the crystals, and his glowing patches emitted a faint, consistent warmth. "It's as if he's become a conduit for the energy these crystals produce," Dr. Carter explained. "He's not just affected by them, he's part of their system." Kate, however, saw Apollo's transformation differently. "He's not a test subject," she said firmly. "He's family. Whatever's happening here, it's bigger than all of us. But we have to respect him." One evening, as the researchers packed up their equipment, Kate and Dr. Hayes sat on the porch, watching Apollo graze under the fading sunlight. The glowing patches on his coat were barely visible in the twilight, but his serene demeanor was unmistakable. "What do you think he's trying to tell us?" Kate asked. "I don't know," Dr. Hayes admitted, "but I think he's fulfilled his role in revealing this discovery. Maybe he's showing us that there's more to this world than we understand." Just then, Apollo raised his head and stared toward the horizon, his ears swiveling. Kate and Dr. Hayes followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual. Apollo whinnied softly, his body language calm but purposeful. "What is it, boy?" Kate asked, walking toward him. Apollo took a few steps toward the pasture, then stopped and looked back at her. It was clear he wanted her to follow. Kate hesitated, but eventually grabbed a lantern and motioned for Dr. Hayes to join her. The two followed Apollo as he led them across the field, his glowing patches flickering faintly in the darkness. He stopped at the edge of a small grove of trees and began pawing at the ground. "What is he doing now?" Dr. Hayes asked. Kate knelt beside Apollo, using her hands to brush away the loose dirt. After a few minutes, she uncovered a small metallic object, an old weathered box. Her heart raced as she opened it, revealing a collection of faded photographs and letters. "These must belong to the previous owners," Kate said, examining the contents. "It's a family's history." Dr. Hayes smiled. "He's not just a part of the crystal's story. He's a part of this land's story. He's helping us uncover its past." As they returned to the barn, Kate felt a deep sense of gratitude. Apollo wasn't just a remarkable horse. He was a guide, a protector, and a reminder of the mysteries that connected them all. And as the crystals continued to glow faintly beneath the earth, their discovery marked the beginning of a journey that would forever change the way they saw the world and the extraordinary animals who shared it with them.